it comes! Let's hope those guns really are dropship incoming. Show them what you can do. Payload online. Initiating startup sequence. It's going to need a few minutes to get charged up.
You really think that's gonna work?
I built it. Of course it's going to work.
Inspires confidence, doesn't it?
Null sector forces are inbound to your position.
Oh, dang it. I meant to...
They're not as young as they used to be.
Watch out for those spices. They aren't as strong, but they tear up the payload.
I can't feel the thing. Need to keep it safe.
There we go! See? Like I said, it just needed a moment to get warmed up. So it's ready to move out? Not quite yet. I should have known.
Hey! So, what's up, everybody? It is the Dark Conservatarian back with another edition of Strike Force. This time, Strike Force interviews, as I am actually bringing somebody from my personal life to talk about politics. And we've been going a little bit back and forth over Facebook and stuff like that. So I thought, hey, the huge potential for some decent conversation and maybe a little bit more debatey conversation. And notice that he goes by the name of Jay. We're not going to reveal his real name, but... And yes, this is not Jay Will, as in the one other South African dude that I had interviewed like sometime last year. This is a completely different Jay. So, introduce yourself, Jay.
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm an old friend of Zach's. I live in Illinois. I do research in robotics. I'm a professional published scientist. And I am a sort of libertarian. Actually, I share many of the same political goals and beliefs as libertarians, but fundamentally, my political beliefs are more based on my Christian faith than, say, the non-aggression principle.
I gotcha. Which, yeah, that's totally fine. I mean, none of my fan base can really say that I am a non-aggression principle purist myself, because I engage a lot with ANCAPs, but yeah, I'm not an ANCAP myself, not particularly. But yeah, as I might have said plenty of times to anarchists and ANCAPs that I have talked to on stream before, introducing my political beliefs and explaining them and whatnot, I had said plenty of times that there was a certain person on back in 2016 after Cruz had dropped out of the primary, and I felt rather alienated by Donald Trump, so I was exploring third-party options, gone talking to Jay here about them, and I was all like, I'm tempted to almost vote for Gary Johnson. Then Jay actually mentioned another libertarian candidate who was still running at the time against Gary Johnson, named Austin Peterson, and through that way, Austin Peterson got me more into libertarianism. Like, before that year, I had heard about libertarianism, plenty enough of it, but I had a little bit more of an alienating attitude towards it, sadly enough, which I feel kind of bad in hindsight, looking at those past experiences. But yeah, I would like to thank Jay a lot for introducing me to Austin, and further expansion on that, getting me into libertarianism more.
You're welcome. Yeah, Austin Peterson is great, and I'm still a fan of his.
Yeah. Sadly, he could not have actually won the nomination. He probably would have actually taken more votes away than Gary Johnson did, because Gary Johnson kind of disappointed everybody on the whole private property and business rights side of subjects with, you should be forced to serve your customer, so forth.
Yeah, that was definitely an inconsistency with what libertarians believe. Um, yeah, really, the Libertarian Party, I think, struggles a lot to actually represent well libertarian ideals, which is really unfortunate. It seems that uh, if they would embrace them more wholly and argue for them more cogently, they wouldn't be such a fringe group.
Right. And there's like plenty more to debate to go on with the internet anarchists and libertarians. I mean, people say that the Libertarian Party is too squishy. In a lot of respects, internet libertarians are either they're either like too hardcore with some other non-libertarian beliefs, or they're too extreme in well, some facets. I don't want to like I don't mean to like alienate any anarchists within my subscriber base, but in some aspects they go a little bit too extreme in their rhetoric or whatnot, to where that it just alienates all the normies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so like I said a little bit earlier, we gone like a little bit back and forth on Facebook over this year in particularly. Like before this year, there wasn't a whole lot, but ever since coronavirus in particularly, some more political debatey interactions with Jay here. But first, I think I ought to ask what I mentioned first. We were gonna talk about off air. Out of curiosity, World War III and Iran. What was your opinion on that, very quickly?
I knew you were going to bring that up, but I don't actually have a real strong opinion on that. I'm, as most libertarians are, I'm pretty quote unquote isolationists. I think that unless you have a strong evidence of direct action against either yourself or your allies, you should really just stay out of conflict that's not your own. So that's generally how I approach things, but to me it seemed like the news was kind of overblowing the gravity of the situation there. But
Right.
Foreign policy isn't exactly my wheelhouse either. So
Yeah, I totally agree that it was all over exaggerated. And I do want to actually emphasize, like, as some of my subscribers and later watching this, they might say down in the comments, there is a little bit of a difference between isolationism and non-interventionism, because isolationism would kind of imply that you are like for heavy tariffs to restrict anybody from doing business overseas, whereas non-interventionism would mean you just don't get the military hardly
Right.
involved in any foreign conflicts unless they
That's-
like directly harm you.
that's actually what I meant to say. I didn't mean to say isolationist is what is I think the straw man that is levied against classical libertarians.
Right.
Non-interventionist is a much better term. It's kind of like the whole like pro-choice, pro-life. How do we term what we believe in? Well, you have what the opponents say you believe, and then you have what the people say they believe, and usually the truth is somewhere in between.
Right.
Um,
Did you weren't like at all afraid that World War III was possibly going to happen during the heat of the Iran conflict in January of this year?
I wasn't too worried. And it was also one of those situations in which I knew there wasn't much I could do about it. There wasn't. I've taken this is my own personal philosophy. I've taken to sort of categorizing political issues by how my influence on those who I know on my social media, whether my influence on them is able to actually make an impact on the world. I don't know anyone who's high up enough in the Pentagon to have actually influenced the outcome of this situation. And I honestly did not have that many people in my social media who were discussing the situation in a way that I felt was inappropriate or irrational. Most people were just making memes up about it. So I didn't feel that it was something where I really needed to study it, understand it, and be able to give my opinion on it.
Right. By the way, there was something that I very quickly forgot to say to Jay here before we went live, so I'm just going to bring back up the intermission footage for a little bit, folks. Just a few seconds right here.
Rendezvous in the courtyard. Here it comes. Let's hope those guns really are. Dropship incoming. Show them what you can do. Payload online. Initiating startup sequence. Going to need a few minutes to get.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks. Just a little quick thing right there. What was I gonna say? Damn it, I forgot my train of thought. Okay, yeah, I'm pretty much of the same opinion. I did not think that it was going to turn into World War III because there wasn't like any major, like fully nuclear capable superpower that was backing up Iran in the same way that China backs North Korea or Russia supports the Assad regime in Syria. The most that I thought was going to come out of that was that it's going to be like Bush's Iraq war, Trump's version of Bush's Iraq war at most, if that even. But
Yeah, and that didn't really fit very well with what Trump campaigned on, which is actually like his. I criticize Trump and his rhetoric a lot, but one of the really solid things that he did advocate during the campaign trail in 2016 was the fact that we don't need to have our military policing the world, and that we can take care of ourselves and not be involved with everything. So I wasn't too worried that he would go off and do something completely different. He knows his base. He knows who likes him, who doesn't like him. So.
By the way, Libertarian Native in the chat, he says, "Why the fuck do I see the Oklahoma State logo?" That's just the profile pic that my personal friend here, Jay, decided to choose a Libertarian Native. So,
Riding Cowboys.
why did you choose this avatar, if I may ask very quickly?
That's where I did my undergrad. So.
I gotcha. So, aside from all the pessimisms of World War III and what might have been the possible outcome if Trump was to, get involved with Iran in however which way he did, on the principled side of things, what do you think about ultimately him not going officially to war with Iran, but making the order to kill Soleimani at least? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I didn't like that. For a long time, we've had presidents with the assumed authority to carry out actions that could cause a war, and I think that's really not acceptable. I think a lot of the critique that he did get from Congress, that this was done without congressional approval, that it was involving the country in something that you need a representative mandate to do. I think he did deserve a lot of that criticism. Yeah.
The Condor JC says, "First timer here. I'm privileged to witness the Dark Man in action live." Well, thanks and welcome to the program, Condor. What was I gonna say? I personally, I admit and agree that it was kind of unconstitutional what he did there. On the principled side of things, I think that was the least that Iran deserved overall, especially since a lot of deaths, military member deaths were caused throughout the years, particularly from Soleimani's own order.
Right. There's the argument that we already were involved in a war in the region in which Soleimani had influence. Problem is that also was an undeclared war.
Yeah.
Right? We've not officially gone to war since World War II, which is crazy.
No official war. Well, could you technically, I don't know, how is North Korea? Because I Was there an official declaration of war? Because I know that technically, legally, we were like under a ceasefire. We're not technically at peace with North Korea. We're just under a ceasefire. But was there an official declaration of war there, or am I wrong in that?
I'm looking it up right now. From what I've heard, the last formal declaration of war from the United States was for World War II.
Okay. And by the way, I just want to add very quickly to everybody listening.
Yes.
My opinions about Soleimani and whatnot. I just and all that I laid out about Soleimani, but I just believe that the attack on the embassy was the final kicker for somebody as as hardline in a way as Trump to finally do something about it. But yeah, overall, I really don't approve of Trump, and even he, I don't think handled the coronavirus lockdowns in particular well enough, or well at all, really. Of course, there's like all of his positions on guns and rhetoric that he's espoused on guns, saying that he's willing to compromise on the assault weapons ban, the one that got instituted back in 1994 and attempted to renew in 2003 and 2013. And now we're gonna arrive to 2023, and if he still remains president and he is surrounded by both the Democratic House and Senate, I don't really trust for him to not buckle to the pressure and make a compromise on that, and therefore no new AR-15s are allowed to be sold or manufactured in the civilian market. So that is my position on his gun stances. Also, the bump stock ban and red flag laws. What do you have to say about that?
They're infringements of the Second Amendment.
Right.
I don't really agree with any kind of law that makes someone a criminal, a innocent at 11:59 p.m. one day, and then a criminal the next day simply for possessing something, an object.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how just laws should work.
Right. And so this also kind of involves Trump as well, because he isn't necessarily the most pro-life president either. There haven't been any heavy attempts to defund Planned Parenthood, for example. I mean, he did nominate Neil Gorsuch as a SCOTUS judge, but at the same time, he nominated Kavanaugh, somebody who believes that Roe v. Wade is legal precedent and doesn't seem to have any strong stance against abortion or Roe v. Wade or whatnot. So I guess that's my next question on your positions, just to clarify. Obviously, I would assume that you're pro-life by philosophy, but on the legal side of things, what are your abortion positions?
So I think a fundamental principle of law is that the individual human being owns themselves. They own their own life. And I think it's scientifically indisputable that human life begins at the moment of conception. That's when the organism, it becomes its own unique, whole human organism, is at conception. And I think from that moment forward, that human being has a right to life in as much as it does not, that he or she does not infringe on the rights of others. I know some libertarians have also argued that the fetus is a kind of parasite inside the woman, and that her right to her own body allows her to eject, if not outright kill, the fetus inside her. I don't agree with that. First of all, abortion doesn't work by trying to safely remove the person in the womb.
Even at late terms?
Abortion works. Right. In every abortion procedure that we have, it's an act of violence.
Well, even in even in late term pregnancies, if somebody was to, for example, do a C-section to remove the fetus out of there, the fetus ain't gonna survive.
Right.
All right.
I think the other principle here, and maybe some libertarians would disagree with me, I think there's a principle that children have a natural right to appropriate care and nurture of their guardians, their legal guardians. I think it's simply a biological fact that offspring are dependent on their parents, at least for the first 9 months, and really for several years afterward. You're simply not free to dispense of your responsibility to a life that is biologically connected to your own, unless someone else volunteers to take that responsibility for you. So if science ever progresses to the point that we can do pre-birth adoptions, where a zygote or a fetus is able to be safely transferred from the womb of an unwilling parent or guardian to the womb of a willing parent or guardian, I don't have a problem with that. I think that should be legal. I think that should be safe. What should not be legal and what should be punished as murder is the deliberate killing of innocent human life.
Right. I believe that too, although I don't know if I'm not for laws that would punish the mother necessarily. The most that I would like to enforce an abortion ban is that we shut down all abortion facilities, like done by the second person, the abortion surgeon. If anything, the abortion surgeon is the one who gets punished, be it by fine or whatever else have you. But the mother themselves, as a typical pro-life logic goes, they are almost as much of victims as the baby that they carry is, because they were like peer pressured into their abortion or whatever else the story may be. Go on.
I mean, sociologically, that's oftentimes the case. And I think as far as, so there's government practice in terms of what's ideal justice, and there's government practice in terms of what's practical. And oftentimes you have, I believe you typically have to start with what's ideal and then think about what's practical.
Yeah, because it wouldn't be.
So ideally, right, everyone who intentionally commits or commissions the death of an innocent human being should face murder charges.
Right.
Practically, I think, especially in this situation, it makes a lot more sense to prosecute the abortionist rather than the mother.
Right.
I think that also applies to this same sort of situation applies to other practical matters of law. So
yeah, there is also the fact that even if we were to try to enforce such an abortion ban on the individual mothers, that would say for example, I keep on hearing stories of mothers doing like self-induced abortions or self-induced miscarriages where they'll like fall down the stairs or something like that. There's no practical way of preventing that unless if we were to like set up a camera in every single room and hallway and stairway in this country, both private and public sector, and that's a very bad Orwellian precedent right there, if you get what I mean.
Most of the time I don't believe in preventative law. I believe in after the fact punitive law.
Right.
So this might be a wild goose trail, but I also don't think speed limits are a great idea. I think if there's a specific victim on the road who's like, I almost got hit by this madman speeding down the road, and they call 911 and they give them the plate number, then you can go after that person, track them down, give them a ticket. But if there's no victim, there's no crime. If something hasn't been done to actually harm someone, put them in danger, injure them, cost them money, I don't think preventative law is typically a very just way of approaching things.
Right. Of course, we had our little spat about roads, but I'm not going to get off on such a such a minimal or rather frivolous topic as roads. I mean,
Yeah.
agree to disagree on that subject, but more
Getting
specifically,
back to
more
getting
specifically,
back to where we were, you're right in that Roe v. versus Wade was ultimately constitutionally decided based on privacy. That
and
the woman's relationship with her doctor was so private that the doctor couldn't
right.
interfere, at least up until a certain. I
But
don't
if
know
I
how they
may,
hit
yes, I'm sorry. If
the
I may,
number
like,
of weeks old, but
if I may like clarify what I was like mentioning about the camera sort of thing, the only way that we'd be able to punish the individual mother is if we had like a video evidence that this miscarriage is actually intentional on their part, self-induced or whatever. That was the main thing I was meaning for like punishing them rather than preventing them.
yeah. So, um, you know, from a political perspective, it would probably make a lot more sense to be able to, at least according to the precedent we've set with the Constitution, it'd probably be a lot easier to prosecute um, the doctor who is engaging in commerce by offering this service of killing an unborn human for a certain price. Um, the government regulates all sorts of commercial activities um, in this way. So
Right.
Roe v. Wade really was a terrible decision in that sense. It doesn't make sense constitutionally, and it really should be overturned. Though even that I've read wouldn't necessarily be the magic bullet to changing things in the United States.
Yeah, it would still be a state by state battle nonetheless. And so I want to like clarify something very quickly because you said a little bit earlier that you believe that the child has a right to be provided for by their by their legal guardians, by their parents. So just to clarify, you are for the adoption option though if a mother is raped and they ultimately don't want the baby, don't want to keep them.
I think adoption should always be an option.
Okay.
There's no reason why anyone should be prevented from.
No, I mean putting up their baby for adoption.
Yeah, I don't see a need to qualify it. Adoption should always be legal, and it should be easy. It should be not that difficult either. Right now, adoption costs a lot more money than it probably should.
Well, I'm not meaning like the act of adopting. Like, for example, I believe that gay couples should, of course, be allowed to adopt a child. But I'm talking about like a pregnant woman who was raped and they want to put up their baby for adoption, put them in the foster care system. You believe that is an option, though?
Are you asking legally is that a good idea or morally is that a good idea? What are you asking?
Well, I guess more ideally in your worldview, do you think that is something that should be allowed if we are to ban abortion, that mothers who don't want their own kid, instead of like killing their kid to get rid of the kid out of their life, they put them up for adoption instead?
I would not support any legal abortion except for the situation in which not removing the child would inevitably kill the mother, and these situations are like 1 in a million.
That's
So I
not
don't make
exactly
any
my
sort
question.
of exception for my legal views on abortion for rape.
Okay, well, I hear you, but that's not exactly my question. My question was, do you believe that a mother who was pregnant but no longer wants their child is no longer allowed to kill their child, all fair and well, but do you believe that they should put their child in the foster care system so that they can become, like, eventually someone else's responsibility than her own responsibility?
So I think whether or not someone chooses to give their child up for adoption is an extremely personal question. That's up to the moral conscience of the mother.
Okay,
Um,
fair enough. Yeah, each individual
so
mother should make their own decision,
I
but
think
you think legally that should be allowed, though?
Yes. Well, yes, of course. I think especially in situations where the mother is extremely young, like I'm still a minor. In those cases, most of the time, it makes sense for them to give up the child for adoption because they're still a child themselves.
Mhm.
Um,
So we're like fast approaching the halfway point of this interview. I do have like a few chat things to address here, if you don't mind. A couple
sure.
questions. Like the first one is from Neil Stone asking, "Would you vote for Joe Jorgensen?"
I probably will, actually.
Might be a question for both of us. I'm not so sure, honestly, Neil Stone, because there seems to be some things about Joe. Of course, there is like the one thing that she is like a pro-choicer herself, but then again, she might be for the legal precedent of allowing the states to determine that for themselves. In that case, which that is like I am
Yes.
for. Sorry, what?
She is, yes, which would, if accomplished, would be such a great step for the pro-life movement, far
Okay.
greater than anything the Republicans have ever done.
All right.
I don't
So
know that she. I'm realistic. I know she's not going to win. Um, but I also know that whether I vote red or blue, Illinois is going to be blue.
mhm.
Statistically, it's just extremely unlikely. So I don't look at my vote as a as I'm trying to influence the outcome so much. That's already very much beyond me. Maybe if
Mhm.
I was in a swing state, I would think about it more practically. I look at my vote as sending a message, as it were. Because
Right.
both the Democrats and the Republicans do a lot of polls and a lot of surveys and a lot of statistics on who votes and for what reason, and who doesn't vote because they're not excited about the candidates. They spend a lot of effort analyzing this. So my logic is that by voting for Joe, or voting for the Libertarian Party, I at least send a message to both the Dems and the Republicans that I would prefer a candidate who was a little bit closer to her than to what they actually are, and that I think is helpful in a small way.
Right. And by the way, Neil Stone, I do see you like bringing forth a whole bunch of chat comments here that you are wanting us to address. Sorry, but we're also having a little bit of a conversation between us. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all your chat comments, Neil. So no offense on that front. Um, Condor JC asks, if someone of sound mind chooses to end their life and does so without physically harming anyone, why do others refuse to grant them that death? I'm kind of confused about the wording of that comment. What do you think, Jay?
So I think he's asking about should it be legal to commit suicide? Which your first
That's the
reaction might
close,
be,
yeah, that's the
uh,
closest thing that I get, and I do believe that there should be no like legal penalties really for somebody or close relatives of theirs if they commit suicide. Really.
so it's a complex issue. Let's start with the moral side of it before we get to the legal side of it. Um, Morally, I never believe suicide is justifiable. I still think so because I'm a Christian. I believe that ultimately we aren't completely sovereign over our own bodies. We
Right.
actually owe them to our Creator.
Mm-hmm.
He is the one who actually owns that body. And so to destroy that body, to destroy this creation made in God's image, is actually violating the rights of God over his own creation.
Hmm.
So suicide is never, ever a something morally right. Now, legally,
Christian
then it
perspective,
might
of
make
course.
sense if your understanding of law is based on that morality, that all killing of innocent life should
Yeah.
be illegal. But when it comes to suicide, practically things kind of break down. Why would you punish someone who's already trying to kill themselves? It doesn't. You actually haven't avenged you can't avenge the blood of one person upon themselves, right?
Right.
I'm gonna kill you because you tried to kill yourself. That does.
It's kind of like the Julian Smith little skit where they were like, it was the Malk one. At the end of it, the one guy goes so crazy that his friends are pronouncing milk in such a weird ass way that he finally pulls out a gun and starts and is about to shoot himself. Then his other friends bring out a gun and they aim at him, and they're just all like, "Don't do it, bro! Don't do it!" And then he's just all like, "You're gonna shoot me for killing myself? That just doesn't make any sense."
Yep, that is a great line from that skit, and perfect for this situation.
Yep.
Yeah.
This
is probably where I would diverge from a pure NAP, non-aggression principle foundation for law and morality, and I would not support the legality of voluntary euthanasia or assisted suicide. I think that is a material participation in violence, even though it's violence against the human person, the innocent human person, even though it's consensual.
Yeah, right.
We could get really gross with it and talk about consensual cannibalism and other bizarre things as well. But
yeah, I believe in the right to life, and that being that nobody can like take away your life without your consent. I mean, yeah, that is a little bit of a divergence between the two of us, but I'm going to just address a little bit of Neil Stone's chat comments here. And Libertarian Native seems to be kind of trying to respond to Neil as well in the chat. I would also like to thank everybody for participating so far. Condor JC, Reckless Trucker, Metal Minister, very briefly, I don't know how long he stayed, sent 1000 Metal Doomer, all you people, all you lovely people. Neil Stone says, pro-life in my opinion is more pro-birth. Well, in all literality, until we have like sci-fi teleporters like in Star Trek, you're not wrong. Pro-lifers are, in all practicality of things, pro-birth at the same time, but none the same. It's kind of a non-issue whether or not you want to call us pro-birth, or at least in my opinion anyways.
Yeah, I would just respond to that comment with the beam. Yes.
Right, the one cartoon Chad guy with the blonde beard and the blonde high and tight haircut, just being like, yes. An example, a girl in Mexico 10 years...
As opposed to death, yes, birth is much better than death.
Yes. And continuing on with this chat comment, though, an example, a girl in Mexico 10 years old was raped and she was going to get an abortion. Having a child would screw up her life. To me, those people are more pro-birth than pro-life, as they don't care about how it will affect another person's life. Well, okay, in the case of like a 10-year-old, sounds like it's going to cause very existential permanent damage on her part, if not outright death. So I believe that more or less falls under the life of mother circumstance. It's just that we all believe that even teen pregnancy to a certain extent, but definitely adult pregnancy, that the only exception for abortion is like the life of mother exception. And this might be a little bit of where that you and I diverge, Jay, but I do believe that brainwaves is when that personhood at least starts. So at 7 weeks is when I want it kept. Before that, legally speaking, I do not see the legal argument as to, say that should be banned. But morally speaking, I still say I don't want you to abort your 1 week conceived zygote.
I don't think a human being's rights should depend on their abilities, their size, their level of development. There's an acronym called SLED that basically covers all of it. I think human beings are valuable simply because they're human beings. and I take that as sort of a fundamental of my moral and political thinking. So I would extend the right to life to the very beginning of human life.
Yeah, and I believe in that logic to an extent. Like, if a baby cannot feel any pain technically at 7 or 8 weeks, I don't believe that that's a determiner to whether or not you can, like, kill them or not. I just, the way that I would frame it is that no person's right to life is, should be tampered with, should be violated by another person. And how do we find personhood? How do we find a person? And I do find it to be solid enough logic to where if there are brainwaves detected, if there's like a thinking, even somewhat mildly thinking person, um, that being like this 7 or 8 week fetus, they're not technically thinking, but they're still somewhat cognizant of the world around them. So I say don't abort them at that point.
So what you're really getting at is an anthropology here, which is what makes a person a person.
Right.
Um, from a purely from a purely secular point of view, it might make sense to define, well, a person has to have these certain requirements of sentience or what have you. But you run into, I think, a lot of moral quandaries when you start doing that. I think, so if someone goes to sleep and their brain stops computing things, does that mean it's now okay to shoot them? No. We agree with that. It doesn't make sense. I believe that a moral code is written within ourselves as persons, as human beings, that we know that from the very beginning, human life is unique, it's miraculous, it's valuable simply for what it is and not for any special abilities or that it has. So, but we should probably move on.
Yeah. We went on well enough about abortion. Abortion is like the pet topic of this YouTube channel, in all honesty. Although it has been a while since I've done a response video of talking about abortion. I really ought to do that sometime soon. But nonetheless, Neil Stone also has like a long chat comment about abortion. We're sorry to say, Neil, but we're probably not going to get to that. He's like bringing forth the violinist argument, if you ever heard about that, Jay.
Oh, yeah. And I think I've already addressed that actually earlier. One of the other principles that I believe in is that a child has a natural right to the appropriate nurture of their legal guardian.
Okay.
It's perfectly fine to transfer that legal guardianship responsibility to someone else voluntarily. But until you do that, you have a responsibility to your offspring.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, moving on from abortions, again, sorry, Neil, we're going to, like, talk a little bit about the topic that got us a little bit heated with each other, but, yeah, but putting that behind us, though, coronavirus and the pandemic lockdowns, like, give the very basics of your opinion in regards of the Rona and the lockdowns.
So, yeah, let's try to approach this from a high level and then get down to the nitty gritty. From a high level in general, I think in 99.9% of situations, individuals should be able to handle their own health and medical and other issues privately. Mm-hmm. They should be able to do that through voluntary contracts, through trade. It should be a libertarian wet dream. right?
Right.
But in the world we live in, the in very few places is the healthcare system free of government domination and control. There, we do not have a free market healthcare system almost anywhere in the world. Certainly not in America. Yes, there are
Take
private
that, social
hospitals.
democrats.
Yes, we do have private for-profit hospitals, but the amount of regulation from the very first college class that a young doctor has to take to the way things are billed, the way insurance works, is ridden with government regulation that skews the market and limits what the market is able to accomplish.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, for example, to
so,
expound on that, I noticed that there was, like, in my research of my response video to Foamy the Squirrel on the coronavirus lockdowns, there's an article that I researched very briefly. It was kind of a brief article, but nonetheless, talking about regulations against hospitals being able to expand their sizes and whatnot. Or at least regulations making it particularly hard for them to expand them.
in my ideal world, when a pandemic happens, which pandemics scientifically are kind of inevitable, like because of the way this constant war between viruses and bacteria and animals and humans that's going on, eventually you'll come across a bacteria or a virus that is very successful biologically in attacking human beings. So it's going to happen eventually. This won't be the first time there's a coronavirus. At some point in the next 100 years, we'll have something similar.
Maybe another something as extreme as the Spanish flu or bubonic plague.
The free market would be able to provide enough healthcare resources that almost everyone has the opportunity, if they do get sick with this deadly virus, to at least have the best care available to them. And then individuals also get to choose privately the level of risk, the level of interaction with other humans they're willing to take in that situation. Unfortunately, in most of the world, we don't have that infinite capacity or resources that a free market should be able to provide. So our resources are very limited. We can't build a hospital in 2 weeks and staff it with people we trained 2 weeks ago. And so my belief is that at the extreme local level, think municipal or county governments, the government has a right and responsibility to institute the least onerous restrictions possible to prevent the local hospital system from being overwhelmed. And why do I think they have that right? I think they have that right because if I am 60 years old and I have a heart condition, but I know that there's a pandemic and I've been staying home, I've been very careful, but then I have an issue with my heart, completely innocently. I've not been reckless. I've not been trying to go and get the Rona. There should be a hospital bed available for me. And it's not fair and it's not right that the hospital should be overwhelmed and I not be able to get appropriate care if I've been careful. So as a practical matter, I think it is fair for local governments, only the most local governments, to institute the least restrictive restrictions they can that prevent that from happening. So that is my legal and moral principle behind why, in theory, right, government should be able to address a pandemic.
Right, and I would say that I am for I would be for restrictions if, like, say, the bubonic plague was making a full comeback. I know that there are like all those stories about squirrels, for example, being found to have it and whatnot, but it's not being so freaking widespread to where we have to absolutely worry about it now. But something like
So the other question, right, is
well,
then
wait,
is the coronavirus a big deal or not? Right. So first,
yeah,
there are three
so
questions that I think we have to address. One is, does the government have a right to be involved? And I've made my case for why the answer to that is yes.
so
The second question is coronavirus a big deal? And I'd love to make my case for why the answer to that is a yes.
And
The
if I
third
may, like,
question is,
finish what I was saying
steps
earlier, though.
should we actually take?
If I may, right. If I may, like, finish what I was saying earlier, though, just in my personal opinion, I don't find, like, a 2% fatality rate overall for the entire populace. I even, like, researched something as low as 0.25%, and it wasn't some seemingly fringe website either. I'll have to send you the link or something, but the average overall has been like 2%, and I've also researched it to be, I think it was like 15-17% fatality rate for seniors even, or people with pre-existing conditions or whatnot. Overall, I don't find it to be that much worth to the same extent of restrictions that we are having instituted right now anyways. Much less to be mandating that businesses shut down, like mask mandates. Ethically, I'm against those. As far as like the government like instituting those, it's a albeit marginal like restriction on freedom, so it ain't really that much worth for me to like say we need a revolt or whatever. But all the same, I believe that's something worthy of criticism nonetheless, and all the other restrictions even more so, shutting down of businesses and so forth. But I'll let you go on for a little bit since I've went on.
Yeah. As a scientist, as a published scientist, as I've mentioned before, I've grown increasingly frustrated and disappointed at how little people, the average Joe, is able to mathematically understand the importance of certain figures or numbers. It's like you mentioned, 2%, that doesn't sound that much, or 0.25%, that doesn't sound like that much. It seems to me that most people think that any number, as long as it's less than 5%, isn't worth concerning oneself with.
Or even less than 10%
the problem
at
is
least.
that mathematically, that's not necessarily the case. A lot, in order to be able to compare things one to another and understand whether they're a big deal, you have to be very careful about how you actually apply them, what the outcomes are, and how those outcomes compare relatively to other ones. So if you'll give me a moment, I'd like to state my case for why I believe it's clear that coronavirus is a big deal for America.
All right, go on. I guess I'll just write everything down as you go along.
Sure thing.
That I want to respond to.
So let me click the link right now. Okay, right now we stand at 187,000 deaths in the United States due to coronavirus.
Is that the official count?
That is the official tally according to worldometers.info. If you go and look at the CDC, it'll be lower because their numbers don't come in for a couple weeks.
I'm sorry, say it again. Was it worldwide or nationwide in the U.S.? That one at 180K.
Nationwide.
Okay.
187,000. Now, a lot of people say these numbers have been skewed, they have been inflated. My answer to that is fairly simple. What you can do is you can look at what are the total number of people who have died in the United States up to in 2020 up to the current date. And you can compare that with the total number of people who have died from all causes in previous years, in 2019, 2018, 2017, etc. When you do that, you'll notice that there's a significant increase and then just the pure raw number of dead bodies from around the middle of March up to now. And in fact, scientists call this the excess numbers, the excess deaths. This is you take the number of dead bodies this year and subtract the number of dead bodies from last year. If you do that, there's been about an 18% increase in death since March, which is very significant. It means 18% more death of all kinds is happening. It simply does not make any sense to say, oh, these 187,000 coronavirus deaths, they would have died of something else. Because the excess deaths numbers are in the 200-something thousands. They're actually greater than the official tally of coronavirus deaths. What this actually suggests is that more people have died as a result of coronavirus than the official tally. And moreover, whatever the true tally is for how many people have died, it's somewhere in the 18% increase of total death range. I think an 18% increase in total death in any nation is a big deal. That's the kind of thing that happens during a war, right? That's the kind of thing that happens when you've been invaded by a foreign country. That's the kind of thing that happens, when a very dangerous virus sweeps the nation. And so I do consider it to be a valid emergency. It's something that is a significant increase to the risk to life of every individual. Well, not every individual, but enough individuals that it really affects the quality of life that people have. So that's my argument for why it's a big deal. You can find these excess death numbers from a million different sources. There's one I like that's by the New York Times, even though I'm not a huge fan of the New York Times. They've done a good job of collecting it and presenting the data. They have an article called Coronavirus Missing Deaths. They keep updating the number. Right now it's at 207,000 missing deaths worldwide. That's not just in the United States, that's worldwide. They keep updating it, and you can see very clearly how the deaths in 2020 jump way above the average deaths from previous years.
So the increase in deaths, like, are you sure that some of that could not be like an increase in homicide? Because I just researched increase in homicides in 2020, and it's showing like a year-to-date comparison between 2019 and 2020. A lot of these major cities have had at least a 30, if not 20% increase in their homicides at least.
Yeah, so that is a possible counter argument, is to say, oh, well, how do we know other things, other categories of death haven't increased either due to the lockdown or due to some independent event, such as the death of George Floyd.
And all the riots that ensued.
Right. To answer that question, you have to look at the scale of those categories. So how many people die of homicide each year in the United States? Do you have that number handy?
Each year in the United States? Well, yes. From what I have generally researched, it's at least 10,000 gun homicides. Total homicides, I'm not exactly certain.
I just looked it up. 2018, there were 15,000 murders.
All right.
So
there's our answer then.
For the murder rate to account for this drastic increase in excess deaths, murder rate would have to expand by a factor of 10, which is ridiculous. Like
it would have to tentuple, however the exact the term is that for that.
That would be 1,000% increase in murder, which is different than you mentioned. There was like a 35% increase.
Well, yeah, that's
So
fair enough. And
you can also look
there's
at
also
same thing kind of applies for suicides. There's about
suicides, like people not going insane over the fact that they're being mandated to stay at home or not work any jobs or have a social life.
There's about 45,000
Car crashes,
suicides
maybe.
per year in the United States.
Car crashes
We're
and
not all the
manslaughter.
way through 2020 yet. If you go from like March until now, that's been less than 6 months. So you can estimate, okay, between March and now, we should have expected about, in normal situations, we'd have about, 20 something thousand suicides. In order for that 20,000 to expand to a number that would account for the excess deaths that are in the 200 something thousand range, again, it would have to be a factor of 10.
Right, and you say that 2020 isn't finished yet. I just want to add that article that I saw from Forbes, it was like talking about year to date between 2019 and 2019, or at least that's what I presume YTD to stand for, year to date.
Yeah.
What else was I going to
so
say?
Homicide and suicide, they're not big killers in general. I mean, they do have an impact, but they're not the biggest fish in the pond as far as categories of death per year, and so they're not an increase in those isn't able to make a big enough impact that you would have. Let's see.
By the way, in the chat,
Excess deaths for the U.S. from March 1st to August 1st are 213,000, according to this article.
By the way, this guy named Alex Mig in the chat, he says, "Nice hat, senor." I do not know if he's referring to your profile pic or referring to the beanie that I'm wearing right now.
Thanks. And I would just also add that the lockdown would cause decreases in deaths in a lot of categories, such as workplace accidents, motor vehicle accidents. These things are just as, if not more common as homicides and suicides and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, but the homicides would have caught back up as soon as like June happened with everybody getting pissed off, and also we were like coming out of the lockdown slowly in late May and early June, and then the riots happened that just rocketed everything to high heat as far as this nation goes. And I guess it is fair enough for me to add, I'm not trying to say that absolutely all of those excess deaths that you go talking about are definitely not coronavirus related deaths or coronavirus caused deaths. Let's be a little bit more specific. It's just I am still like remaining within a grain of skepticism in regards of that. I mean, obviously
Well,
some of them
there's
are
about,
unconfirmed.
If you take the difference between the excess deaths, that's 213K, and the official COVID tally, that's 187K, the difference there is 26K. That's 26K slack that has to be attributed either to other categories other than COVID increasing, or the fact that the official COVID tally is undercounting. One or the other.
Yeah, and I guess at this point we'll kind of move on from talking about the exact data points of coronavirus and go talking a little bit about lockdowns. Like, I know that you kind of explained to me on that Facebook post that I had posted, querying people, all my pro-lockdown and lockdown sympathetic friends, what their positions were. But just to kind of reiterate, are you for shutting down non-essential businesses?
I'm unwilling to suggest any policy at a general, nationwide, or statewide level. I think it should always be up to the local government, because only they have the detailed numbers on how many people got sick and had to go to the hospital yesterday and today, and how many hospital beds do we have. They should be the ones making that decision. I do think that, for example, in New York City, they were pretty much at capacity for several weeks, almost a month, it made a lot of sense for New York City to say, if you're not an essential business and you can't work from home, don't work together in such a way that could overwhelm our hospitals more.
So,
And I do think that any major city is eventually going to have to face that decision, because eventually the virus will get around and eventually it will spread. There's no way to avoid it. It's going to happen. And so at some point, I think for most municipal governments of any decent size, certainly Wichita and above, is going to have to lock down businesses, at least for a period of time.
so if you're like a council member or a...
Unfortunately, what happened is that we kind of nationwide all decided to freeze in our tracks in March, even though it hadn't hit a lot of cities yet, at least not very hard. And so if you look at, like, say, Wichita, or say Milwaukee, or a lot of cities just did not have the viral inertia going to be in trouble yet, but they locked down anyway.
Kind of,
and they kind of didn't help them very much, because they were able to completely prevent any virus from happening, but then when they open back up, it just comes right back.
So if I may pause you for a second there.
When you do the lockdown, you have to do it at the right time, right when your hospitals are about to be overwhelmed.
So if I may, like, ask for clarification. Say if, for example, you're like a council member or a mayor of a city like Wichita or New York, you would put in forth a mandate saying, yes, shut down bars and gyms.
If my best scientists, public health experts, and local statistical modelers are looking at things and saying, if this trajectory continues the way it is, our hospitals will be overwhelmed in 2 weeks, then yes, I would pull the trigger and say, we need to restrict people's ability to spread this virus.
Okay, in the current state of affairs, though, the way that the stats are looking and so forth, would you make that go ahead?
Well, that depends on the city. You'd have to ask me about a specific city.
Well, let's start off with Wichita.
Well, so I don't know what the stats are in Wichita. So.
All right. How about New York?
I think so. New York, right? They went through hell. I think they've achieved, if not a real herd immunity, they've probably achieved a semblance of a herd immunity, and they should be pretty unrestricted at this point.
Okay.
But I do think that when New York was in the heat of it, when New York was the one city in America that was accounting for 80% of the deaths from coronavirus in the country, the entire nation,
right,
they needed to be shut down. I don't think they need to be shut down right now.
Okay.
And most places in America no longer have the essential, non-essential industry distinction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anywhere,
thank God,
where you simply are not allowed to do business at all due to the pandemic. Unless there might be places in California, I think I've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
You are at least allowed to conduct your business with certain restrictions regarding face masks and how many people can be in the building and so on and so forth. So we're past that, at least. But it's not unheard of that one of the cities that has not had an outbreak yet will have an outbreak in the future, because it's coming for you. There's no way to avoid it unless you build a wall and don't let anyone in or out.
Okay, Donald Trump. What was I gonna say next? There was also another answer in regards to that little query, that little survey that I was doing on Facebook that you addressed. You said that for now, in with the current circumstances, actually, you had given this answer last month, but you had said essentially that you would be for shutting down virtually all protests, be it anti-lockdown protests, pro-gun protests, or pro-police reform, pro-BLM protests, in light of the coronavirus?
Again, it depends on the city. It depends on what's going on in your specific city, right? Some cities have already been through the virus and they have lots of hospital resources. They can probably do whatever they want. Some cities might be just on the verge of a real difficult time where they don't have enough hospitals and there's too many people sick. So it's going to depend, right? I definitely think a lot of local governments were morally inconsistent in the way they restricted certain kinds of protests, certain kinds of businesses, certain churches, and then didn't restrict other kinds of protests.
Right, which we'll get into that a little bit later.
That's where I know I mentioned, whatever restrictions are made, they have to be the least onerous ones possible.
Right, but you do believe that shutting down, you do believe that protests are completely on the table?
It depends on the city whether or not I presume we're talking about an outdoor protest.
Right, yes.
I think it depends on the city. I think it would be extremely unusual to have a city in which I would consider it acceptable to have a bunch of people within 6 feet of each other, hundreds, thousands of people packed together, wearing or not wearing masks. That's dangerous. In most places in the United States right now.
Okay. How do you reconcile that with the First Amendment, just to kind of clarify more than anything?
I mean, I reconcile that the same way I reconcile, your ability to yell fire in a crowded theater. Right? It's not, the people aren't being punished for their actions, but for the consequences their actions have on the life and limb of their neighbor.
Okay.
So if you're free to express your point of view, but if the way you choose to express your point of view is by gathering in such numbers and with such disregard for the COVID-19 virus, that a lot of people get sick and a lot of people have to go to the hospital, and the hospital is in trouble, then that's the force behind the law there. It's
I would
unsophisticated to look at any given right in the Bill of Rights and say this is absolute, in a sense that anything I possibly say, for example, is covered under free speech, regardless of whether or not it results in someone else being dead.
Okay. I would give a little bit more response to what you said there in regards of constitutional rights and so forth, but I'm just gonna move on to the next subject because we're already 13 minutes past time. Actually, didn't know of how much further you want to go.
I probably want to hop off pretty quickly, but if we have a couple more comments, I'd be okay with that.
Not so much from the chat. Actually, the chat has kind of died down ever since Neil Stone says that he had to go. And sorry, Neil Stone, that we could not get to all of your chat comments. But yeah, this is a little bit more of a tighter interview than I typically host. And not necessarily a knock on you, Jay, but none the same. So What is your opinion in regards of George Floyd and the riots and police? If you want to like give a quick opinion on that.
You want my tweet-sized hot take?
Your tweet-sized hot take. So it's basically under 260 characters.
It'll probably be longer than that. Let's be honest.
Oh, okay.
As I have a lot of different comments. Honestly, I think as a libertarian, I think we have so many laws that don't need to be laws, and these laws exist. They function in a way that our local police forces are able to wield whichever one is convenient in a way that is kind of merciless and cruel towards the poor, and towards not the poor as well. I've gotten tickets for traffic violations that did not have any victim. I've been detained by police for crimes that should not be crimes.
Detained as in you were just held on spot, you weren't arrested?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, again, these are mostly motor vehicle.
I never really fully understood the term detained, but yeah.
But I mostly stay out of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And man, if you've ever been to court to like protest or dispute a ticket, it just sucks the life out of you because you have to stand there without your phone because they confiscate it at the courthouse, and you just waste hours and hours of your time doing this for tons and tons and tons of people in America. The local government is an oppressor that is punishing people for things that don't matter and that don't affect other people at all. And so I think we have a very unjust system. I think that's why a lot of people who are poor don't like the police. And as far as how that intersects with race, that varies a lot from city to city.
The systemic racism part.
From individual police officer to individual police officer. But certainly we can look at the history of Black people in the United States and say that they've been kind of screwed in a lot of different ways. And there's no easy way to get over that in one generation. And there are certainly, I think, pockets of racism within America where people use laws that aren't written in a racist way, but they weaponize those laws against Black people.
They enforce them selectively.
They enforce things selectively. Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you've ever done a ride along with a police officer.
Did a what?
While they're on patrol, but they spend most of their time in the.
I'm sorry. If I've ever done a what?
A ride along where you sit in the patrol vehicle and just sort of keep them company while they do their job. It's mostly spent driving around the poor side of town, running plates, and trying to find an excuse to detain someone. I don't really think that serves and protects in most cases. And so I think we have a big issue with the inflation of ticky-tacky laws in our cities, in our states, even at the federal level.
Especially at the federal level.
That gets weaponized in certain places against people who can least afford to deal with that crap.
Right, and certainly there is an area of agreement that I have with you in that laws need to be reformed. The drug war and qualified immunity, I would say that overall I am against, or at least reforming from what it stands right now. No-knock raids, I'm overall against.
Breonna Taylor shouldn't be dead. Should not. There is no possible world I believe, in which it should be legal for the government to knock down your door at 1 a.m. in the morning, and you're at fault if you start shooting back. Rand Paul, one of my favorite politicians and one of the few politicians I really believe in this country.
Right.
He introduced his Justice for Breonna Taylor law that would ban no-knock raids in the future. And I think that should be passed, and I think it's disgraceful that so many politicians who claim to care about this issue have not gotten behind this law and gotten it passed.
Was it the absolutely only thing that the law was meant to affect, or was there like some other law pertaining not to no-knock raids that was attached to it?
That's a good question, because that is something that happens with a lot of federal legislation.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I've looked into it. That's all it does, is it bans no-knock raids. And
I'll
actually,
take your word for
some
it.
politicians have taken that as their reason why they won't support it, because they think, well, we should have a law that goes farther and does all this other police reform stuff. And that I think is silly. Like, if it's a good law, pass it.
Because so the law was basically going for their agenda, but their problem with it was that it wasn't going far enough for their agenda. Right. That is why they denied it.
That's how a lot of the Democrats congressmen have.
That's so freaking stupid, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Really is. Like, imagine if there was a law, some constitutional amendment, I don't know, or federal law or something that's okay. Say that Roe v. Wade was completely overturned, and then there was some federal law that was put forth to or amendment to recognize the right to life for babies, say at 18 weeks rather than 20 or 24 weeks, whatever it is, the national cap that is put. And if some pro-lifer was to vote against it because it doesn't go all the way down to 0 weeks. I mean, you ended up saving lives because you turned down that law.
The pro-life and the abolitionist factions of the pro-life movement. But I'm pretty practical when it comes to actual decisions about if I were a representative in a legislature, how I would choose things.
Yeah. Right. What else?
So I think there's more to say about the whole issue.
So what is?
Black Lives Matter, right?
What's your opinion of the movement and the group?
It's complicated.
I mean, I personally,
there's
there's
an organization, right? The one that technically has the name, has the website, and they're basically Marxists, and I don't agree with them. But there's also a movement that's much bigger than that, that is affirming a truth that I think is not only true, but also important for our time and day, which is that Black people aren't afforded the same respect and dignity towards their lives and persons as they should.
Not all lives matter.
Also a lot of poor white people.
Right, not all lives matter if Black lives don't matter, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a valid statement. There's a lot of, but as I mentioned before, there's a lot of Marxists in this country who I believe don't actually care that much about Black dignity, Black personhood, Black prosperity. And they just want to bring the revolution. They want to overthrow capitalism. They want everyone to live off welfare.
Like all the Antifa people that participated in the riots
And I think that has driven a lot of the unrest that we've seen. The riots, somewhat the looting, though I think that's really just opportunism and poverty.
Right.
Um,
So you would say that you are like firmly anti-riot, correct?
absolutely, anti-riot, anti-looting. Um, it's it's a violation, of the non-aggression principle. It's a violation of the eighth commandment: do not steal. The sixth commandment: do not kill. Um, you don't if your dad it mistreats you, doesn't mean you get to go and
And beat your sister.
punch your sister in the face.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to add the caveat that if, say, the local government specifically was oppressing you in some sort of way, that it's fair enough that you go rioting against the public sector buildings that are pertaining to that local government. That is like different from what we're talking about here. I'm just saying that mostly to our audience more than to you.
If you're going to go that route, I think if we're talking real revolution,
Right.
where you really are like, we are under a tyrant and we cannot live under this tyranny. The proper way to go about a revolution is not through indiscriminate mayhem, but through organizing different leaders and instituting a separate structure of authority and governorship.
Secessionism.
And, separate. Yeah, basically secede.
Right. Yeah, I got you on that point. I completely sympathize. But I guess to ask this last question very quickly before we go off, because I don't know of how much further you want to go. How many more minutes would you say that you have?
Let's give it 5.
All right. So very quickly, systemic racism, and I know that you said specifically that there are individual police departments that you do believe are particularly racist, and that would only imply to me that there are some other police departments that are specifically not racist. But looking at the bigger picture overall in the United States, do you think the overall police and police departments is racist? And also, very quickly, what do you think of ACAB? I guess almost forgot to ask you that.
Okay. So when you say something is systematically racist, the systemic adjective there is very important, right? That's the adjective we're trying to use. So if you look at a big system like the entire United States, simply saying that the entire United States has a systemically racist policing does not imply that there don't exist cities where there is no systemic racism, right? Because you're looking at the big picture. That's you can't. So I don't think it's necessarily all that helpful to be able to quantify it at a national level. I think it's more of maybe on a state level would be easier. I think you can look and say, okay, if you look at the statistics from a national level, and then you look at you control for poverty, and then you look at the difference between. Actually, I really don't know. I really don't know whether or not you'd be able to say that or not. If you're just looking at police at a national level, and part of the issue is that nobody collects data, really detailed data at a national level. There is no there's no organization that is doing that. Every police department records their data differently.
Right. I was about to mention the
It's really hard to
FBI.
get good data.
I was about to mention the FBI, but then there is the fact that the FBI collects their data from police departments.
You can get really basic data, but you can't get the kind of detailed data that would be the smoking gun, as it were,
Right.
for this kind of thing.
I understand.
There are studies that have been done that have presented nuanced views of, like, for example, one study was done specifically on the Houston Police Department, and it found that police were actually somewhat less likely to unjustifiably shoot a black person than a white person. But they were more likely to abuse them physically in ways that didn't lead to death.
Oh.
Or they were more likely to escalate a situation in different ways. And so, studies like that don't make either the SJWs or the red pill people very happy, because it doesn't fit the narrative very well. It turns out the world is complicated and messy.
All the red pill alpha males.
Or the alt-right. Maybe I should say the alt-right instead.
Well, no, I do believe that to an extent you can be red pill without being alt-right, but anyway.
There's a big burden of proof for anyone who claims that American government and American law enforcement does not have a systematic racism problem. I think there's a big burden of proof on them, just given the number of black people, the rate at which black people have to interact with the legal system compared to white people, even above and beyond, the controlling for poverty, and the specific history of black people in America. There are a lot of places in America where we have not gotten past the 50s culturally. The attitudes are still the same. I've spent a lot of time in rural Missouri, rural Illinois. It's just different, and I think it's ridiculous to presume that our culture could or would move on from the horrible crimes we committed against the black race,
Right.
from before the beginning of the founding of our country up to at least the 60s.
Yeah.
That we would just move on from that immediately. Culture just doesn't work like that. So there's a big burden of proof, I think, for anyone who claims there's no racism in law enforcement to actually do that.
Yeah, I do want to say that I do fully believe and accept that there are individual police departments that have a majority of their officers within their jurisdiction that might be racist or evil in a way that they have committed at least one case of police brutality and nothing has been done against that, or they are unapologetic about that. But my biggest problem is the generalization that the majority of, like, all cops within the United States, like, I still find that what I said earlier there, the individual police departments that have their own majority police officers that do evil shit, it's still a minority, and to use that and sensationalize it to justify the saying ACAB, all cops are bad, that the majority of police in the United States are evil,
Stood for.
What?
That's not what I thought it stood for.
That's what you haven't ousted for?
That's not what I thought ACAB stood for. I thought there was a significantly more inappropriate.
ACAB, it is all cops are bastards. It's the official
Right.
saying, but
Well, in my
I
As
believe
a
that.
Christian, I would say all people are bastards. That the line between good and evil actually passes through every human heart.
Oh,
Everyone
oh yeah, of
is
course.
has fallen short of the glory of God. Is at heart a sinner opposed to Him and in complete rebellion against morality and goodness. So, in that sense, all people are bastards. All people are bad. Um,
Yeah, the Christian point of view is that everybody is a sinner. I just the way that from a secular point of view we conceptualize evil and people project that upon generally all police. That's where I have deals with.
I'm not sure that I totally get this slogan. I think if I may be wrong here, but I think what they're trying to say is that if you sign up to enforce um, all of these laws that really do nothing but hurt poor people uh, and help preserve the rich. I can sympathize with that in a sense that, as I said before, there are so many laws that should not be laws. Our justice system is so inefficient and unjust in so many ways.
Right.
But I also realize that no, most cops don't see it that way. They actually do. I think for many of them, they do see their job as a service to the community. They just don't have the
Right.
perspective to see it from the eyes of, well, their victims. In
Yeah,
many ways.
there is like the precedent, of course, that is set by those laws that a police officer can be bad and likely get away with it. And of course, they do not. Not every cop or individual is the same in their beliefs. Like a lot of cops say, yeah, the drug war is justified, weed is bad, bruh, and all that stuff. I'm talking when I go talking about the evil of an individual cop, I go speaking on more of the objective level, like committing murder or for really arbitrary reasons. Like say they pull you over for a speeding ticket and just right off the bat they go beating the shit out of you or whatever. Just as an arbitrary example.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly indefensible for the position that every
But
cop is a monster who just wants to kill people.
yeah, and JC Armitage in the chat, she says, not all cops are bad. That's very true. It's just that they don't seem to do a good job at keeping the bad ones at bay. Yeah, and that's the reason why I say that, generally
That's also
speaking.
another way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I say that, generally speaking, police are of neutral moral character until they've actually saved a life. Yeah, or they've ratted out another bad cop.
Well, yeah, and I think there are a lot of police departments that have a culture of us versus them. We're the good guys. We're the ones who keep order in society. Everyone else are the bad guys. And that culture is what does result in a lot of injustice, where cops who do abuse their authority, even by the low standards of American law, are not prosecuted. So
Yep.
I'm not a huge fan of cops. I would never become one, and I probably would not encourage anyone I know to become one.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's fair
I
enough.
also recognize that
So
that
did,
everyone's sinful. So
all
we
right.
should realize things up.
All right, so do you want to like? Sorry, Scorch, but we've already kind of went on a little bit longer than Jay here has wanted to go. So, unless you want to address what he has to say very quickly, Jay, or do you want to just give a final word and then we leave?
Let's just go on, move on.
All right. Yeah. Sorry, Scorch. But anyway. I would like to thank Jay a lot here for joining me. It was a very productive conversation overall. And Yeah. So, any final words to say, Jay?
Nope, not really. It's a pleasure being here. Pleasure discussing my views with you, and yeah.
All right. And so for the next episode of Strike Force is likely going to be next Sunday, when I'm going to be talking with two leftists and one person who's probably more of a centrist, talking about 2020 politics as well. Tune in for that. And again, I would like to thank Jay, personal friend of mine, for coming on. He is like only the second person to do so. And to all of you, I'll see you all later. Good night, and God bless.